Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's annual meeting session. My name is Ali Land. I'm the Deputy Project Manager working with BJA's Body-Worn Camera Training and Technical Assistance Program. Points of view or opinions expressed herein do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. And I will now pass it off to Charles Stevenson, Body-Worn Camera TTA Lead and Principal Advisor with CNA, to begin the session, Advancements in Body-Worn Cameras and Related Technology. Charles?
Thank you, Ali. And everyone, welcome to this afternoon session. This afternoon, we're going to have 4 guest panelists discuss different technologies associated with body-worn cameras. We're going to give them about 5-6 minutes each to do a short presentation. And then at the end of the presentations, we're going to have a panel Q&A sessions where we will discuss questions that hopefully you'll bring up and a few questions I have in my back pocket. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Elliot Harkavy, a Senior Advisor at CNA and a technologist on the Body-Worn Camera TTA team.
Yes, how are you doing? I wanted to first say that this session will cover a wide range of technologies. This list here is just a sample. If you have questions about something not mentioned, don't worry about it, just ask. In fact, we want this session to be more of a discussion than a presentation. So please feel free to put a question into the chat at any time. And also feel free to use the raised hand feature to ask a live question if you're not comfortable putting something in the chat. So starting with the top section, the analytical tools, most of these center in some way, shape, or form around AI. And AI sounds scary. Many people are very concerned about it. But in reality, it's already in use in many of the body-worn camera systems that the vendors have out today. It's especially used in the transcription software and the redaction software. And it's becoming more common for object recognition, object tracking, the automated license plate reader function, which is now available in many of the in-car video platforms, and actually some of the body-worn camera platforms, where just through the software, if used properly with the right lighting and properly enabled, it can do some LPR functions for you in the camera. Now, it's also used for facial recognition, and that's fairly controversial due to some issues differentiating faces across minority groups a few years ago. I think Christian may talk to this, and if not, I'm happy to come back to it if someone wants to ask a question. But the transcription software, just because it's available to us actually on this Zoom right now, the same or essentially similar software, it's become so accurate, it's in the 90-some-odd% accuracy. And I actually had a chance at a recent listening session I had around people with disabilities to see the transcription software side by side with professional live transcribers. And the transcription software actually did better because it uses context to correct its own mistakes. And if you use the CC button on the bottom of your screen, you can actually see that auto correction taking place. You know, there are a few vendors now offering software to review all your BWC video, to analyze what's happening in that video. What's very interesting is they've gone from pitching themselves as giving you a full, complete scorecard of how your officers are doing to rather identifying video that human beings, supervisors, and managers should look at for good or bad purposes. And that's much more where the technology really sits today. A key issue with AI is the amount and the variety of data required to properly train it. The more complex the recognition, the larger number of diverse data samples that are required for training. Now, one of the things that came up yesterday is AI limited only to those agencies that are well-resourced and large agencies? And no, there was a presentation at IACP Technology Conference this year by the chief from Alliance Nebraska Police, who are using low-cost AI-based tools to extract data from their BWC video to write reports and populate databases for situational awareness. And as a result, they've eliminated most of the report writings, and the officers are spending 95% of time on patrol rather than 75% before. So the chief says that's like an equivalent to having 20% more officers on duty at any given time. Now, there are some really complex AI tools under development in the Netherlands and in UK to analyze across all audio, video, and other data that they may have, not only to solve crimes, but also identify major crimes that haven't been reported. This is in development. It's probably at least a few years before this is ready for prime time, but it's interesting to think about where they're going for it. Now, among some of the new features, the CAD RMS integration has been around for a while, but it's becoming more and more popular to ensure that videos are tagged. But like AI, it takes a lot of training and analysis to get it right. Some agencies with the live link matching can reach upwards of 95% match or even higher with a lot of fine tuning. However, some agencies report as low as a 35% match when matching in batch process without any of that fine tuning. Now, among other features, live streaming for a long time was a shiny feature that had few viable use cases. However, now that it's widespread, agencies are developing excellent use cases for situational awareness, live supervisor review and support, and otherwise assisting officers in difficult situations. The features line should have included automated triggers, which have become increasingly popular for ensuring BWC activation. Such triggers could include activating the BWC when an officer pulls a weapon, engages lights and sirens, is near other officers with activated BWC. Some vendors will offer it when an officer is running or when you enter a defined geographical area. There are other agencies that don't have these features that are really concerned that if you have it, the officers will rely on the triggers, and the triggers don't impact every situation. In fact, there's a lot that they don't impact, and they're really concerned that the BWC will not be used. Those agencies are using things like reminders in the dispatch to remind officers to turn on their body-worn cameras or confirm that their body-worn cameras have been turned on. But any agency I've spoken to that has the triggers would not want to be without them. They are adamant about that. Now, IT security should not be overlooked. Things such as strong firewalls, strong passwords, two-factor authentication, enforcing security updates. That last one is really important because a 2019 study showed that 80% of hacks are via known exposures where a patch was available but not yet installed. Now, these and many other security features are usually part of the CJIS compliance, but that varies slightly from state to state, and it will certainly be part of the future CJIS compliance according to the changes that have been announced. Anyway, that's just a quick overview. I'd like to turn it over to Christian Quinn.
Thanks, Elliot. All in the session. Thanks for being here. Christian Quinn, I was a major with Fairfax County, Virginia until 2021. I stood up our body-worn camera program, oversaw the procurement process, responsible for a lot of other technical initiatives and day-to-day utilization of technology. Since my retirement, I've been working in the consulting and gov affairs space, so doing a lot of work that just generally touches that intersection of policy and technology for public safety. So really quick on this, thinking in terms of US state laws, policy issues, some of the bigger ones that tend to be proposed as legislation or actually passed involve the availability of footage as publicly available or releasable. And sometimes you see exemptions in there like video that's in a private residence, video from a healthcare setting, mental health providers, other types of social services. The other component you see sometimes mandated is number of days required to release, and you can see like the extremes with Seattle where it's got to be out nearly immediately, or California where it's 45 days. The other piece of legislation you tend to see are data retention periods, and I've seen some creative things where states have sought to not have BWC footage considered the same way as other digital records. And I would imagine that that's primarily driven by cost, that they begin to realize, hey, if we hold this footage to the same standard that we hold any record to, we're going to drown in data, holding on to things that, that this is not hyperbole. Sometimes it's actually written in where the retention period is like 99 years. So you can imagine at scale what that starts to look like when you have programs that are yielding gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes of data, what that storage would look like. Sometimes we see mandates on issuance or use of cameras like we do in New Jersey. And then the last area, and I'll speak to this for a minute, is kind of that intersection of body-worn camera with biometric technology, most notably facial recognition technology. And then the other area that I'm going to speak to a little bit briefly is the intersection of the use of body-worn cameras where First Amendment activity or demonstrations are concerned. So, and all of that legislation that came up in the past 2 years, in part driven by reform, part driven by broader social justice conversations related to biometric data. Essentially, some of the folks that kind of led the charge on this, Ted Lieu from California, Don Beyer from Virginia, crafted legislation that would have prohibited the use of facial recognition technology in conjunction with body-worn cameras or the use of federal funds to purchase some variation thereof. And one that comes to mind is from 2021. It was the Face Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act that covered this. And essentially what it said is you cannot use any kind of facial recognition technology in conjunction with BWC. So most people are not aspiring to do that anyway. But where I always add caution is if an officer in the worst case scenario were slain and the last thing on that BWC footage was the assailant or the act itself, I think we would at the very least want to see if we could cultivate probe images from that footage, from the stills, depending on the resolution, depending on the angle, the lighting, and that sort of thing. And if otherwise authorized to use facial recognition, I think that would be an appropriate use case. As it happened, this bill kind of died in the legislative process. It never came to fruition as an actual law. The other one, it was kind of led by Bush and Ocasio-Cortez from New York. They introduced an amendment banning facial recognition conducted solely on the basis of activities protected by the First Amendment. So essentially turning on body-worn cameras for the purpose of cataloging who was at a First Amendment demonstration. And I think back to my own time when we crafted policy around this, we specifically prohibited that, but allowed room for the use of facial recognition, not facial recognition, for the use of body-worn cameras at First Amendment demonstrations, because you do have crimes occurred there, you do have use of force occur there, you have an interest in protecting both the safety of the demonstrators, counter protesters, and the general public in the area, and you are engaged in your lawful authority in uniform, present. Sometimes you have CDU elements. I know we're going to be discussing that as a specific topic later in the day today. So I think neither one of these were particularly problematic bills. I just always like to add those caveats to think about those nuances associated with those, and not necessarily throw out everything in terms of capability and opportunity, because some of these issues tend to be inflammatory or on the surface sound like, well, that's kind of an easy idea to pass. So on this issue of advanced video analytics, and we're, the big ICP conference is coming up, and if you take time and you're there and you walk the exhibitor floor, you're going to see some extraordinary things, some that actually exist, some that look really good because they're in demo mode at an exhibit hall. But over the past, I would say 8 years, every year I'm kind of intrigued by this in terms of the ability to search for, and I think back to the watershed event of the Boston Marathon bombing, where you have subject 1 who was like ball cap guy and subject 2 who was like backpack guy, or whatever they would be calling those brothers shortly after the bombing, where they had crowdsourced all this information, taken information and video from private security cameras and footage, and recognized that there was so much video to go through that it could not possibly be gone through at scale by human beings. The other thing is, when you look back at it, it's really hard to look at crowd video, especially if it's grainy, not well lit, and find specific actors or find a specific ball cap or a set of sneakers or a backpack or those sorts of things. There's a lot of positive there. There's a lot of utility there, and there's a lot that fits into this scheme of automation that adds a ton of value. Where we tend to see resistance is anything that enhances our capacity to track people's movement at scale. And also anything that enhances our capacity to link people together, like actors who are otherwise, you don't have video of them in the same frame, but you can use software to query all the video that you have and see, do these individuals ever appear in the same video frame? From an intel standpoint, from a forensic standpoint, that is a significant advantage. Suffice to say, certain privacy advocates do not like that, see that as kind of big brotherish, and see that as like a frightening new frontier. Also, linking people to locations that might be sensitive or personal, like places of worship, settings where they may be getting treatment for whether it's healthcare or mental health, anything that overlaps locations that have some kind of relation to reproductive rights conversation. That is being brought up a lot in the LPR space. That is being brought up a lot in the digital privacy space because it's an inflammatory issue, tends to spark a lot of feelings on either side of the issue that get people talking. So just something to be mindful of as we move forward. Overall, I'm very optimistic with respect to BWC footage, like any other footage, simply being able to be searched at scale through automation, being able to be leveraged to a greater extent with these tools. But I throw out some of these things for consideration on the call today, because we do hear those conversations taking place, and to just kind of tread lightly and be mindful of some of the sentiment out there around this. Last thing I'll say on the sentiment analysis, I've looked at going back as far as 2014, sentiment analysis for the purpose of safety and security, intel. And way back then, I think the best use of sentiment analysis, I'll say two things. Number one is a lot of times it was sold as kind of a set it and forget it thing. Like the system will tell you when you're trending up or down on social media or Twitter or what have you. And what we always find is that a good analyst is perhaps made more capable by the use of a good tool, but rarely are these tools just set it and forget it. The other thing is, to me, it's not exact. It's kind of like the temperature, sort of like predicting the weather. You want to have a baseline, you want to have some intel there. So I'm not going to speak a whole lot on the technical capability of this. Yesterday's session on the utilization and perspectives on analytical tools did a fantastic job of going through NLP. I'll just point out a couple policy things. You would think that this would be widely accepted by those who want to see law enforcement accountability, but there's a lot of concerns around our capacity to conduct surveillance at scale, our capacity to really leverage all of that video. I think the promise of this is, and as it was said yesterday, the more that we can automate, the more that we can make use of all that video that we're really not looking at. Think in terms of investigations, like looking for like keywords, name searches, things like that, perhaps even specific voices. It puts us in a better position. And I'll hold on to this for later in the presentation, or we can come back to it in the interest of time.
Christian, thank you. We'd like to go ahead and hand it off to Sergeant Naughtington at this time.
All right. Hi. Thanks for having me today. Sergeant Tom Naughton with St. Louis County Police Department, Missouri. I've been running the body camera program here since we started in May of 2019 with our kicking off and training and getting all the equipment installed. And then since then, we went live with over 700 body cameras and 350 in-car camera systems January 1st of 2020. Since then, we've increased our program to include ALPR systems that are integrated with the body camera system itself on the same platform. And then we've also started to do some other things with MOUs with neighboring agencies that are utilizing the same devices from the same vendor. So the 400 plus vehicles, we ended up doing a supervisor install on the cars that we weren't putting cameras in, so we can still track the data of the vehicle. We use that for our mapping purposes, which you'll see here in the upcoming slide. All of the training, we did all of our professional staff and our commissioned staff for the training on the body cameras, so that everyone had some level of familiarity with the system. They were able to utilize what they needed from it. We do have a current partnership with these MOUs with 12 area departments now. We are expanding. There are other agencies coming on board here within the next year or so that will also be part of the same user group. In this pictures here, you've seen a few things that we've done, just simply mounting the body camera on our tactical robot. And things like that, was trying to think outside the box on how we could better utilize the equipment. With that, we actually will respond to any barricaded subject or any of the calls for service that include maybe a suicidal subject or a jumper on a bridge type of thing like that, where it would be beneficial to actually be able to live stream at the command post. The negotiators or our tactical teams, as they go in, can actually stream the robot, and we can stream the individual officers' cameras. We'll do multiple. The system allows us to do close to 5 or 6 cameras and clearly be able to see them on our screens. We can do more, but then it starts minimizing the actual size. So with our MOUs, what you're looking at here is the outlined areas in red and the lower area in orange. That's all of St. Charles County, St. Louis County, and St. Louis City. St. Louis County itself is 523 square miles. I've included St. Louis City in there, and St. Charles County you can see is just as big, if not a little bigger than us. By enabling the mapping system here with having the MOUs with each agency, we're able to see where each of the cars are. These are all cluster groups that we're looking at. The green dots would be the number of body cameras and car cameras that are located inside of those areas. The blue dots are cameras that we can actually stream that are outside of the network, such as our MoDOT highway cameras or any other static IP address camera that we've put into the system. This kind of shows you the benefit here of having multi-agency agreements to be able to see this data. This is an active shooter training that was going on that involved a couple different municipalities that are on the platform, as well as St. Louis County and St. Louis City officers. If we zoomed in on the slide that just shows the building with the cluster groups below it, if we zoom on to it, like the number 5 there, you can see that we're actually looking at a couple different officers' body camera and car, so it identifies who they are. The 2427 at the top, there's actually a municipal agency. They're not dispatched by us, and this is a benefit to having them on this system, as we can actually see them and we can communicate with them. So by having this GPS mapping available for any of our crime scenes or any of our responding areas that we're using, we're actually able to do greater resource management. Supervisors, or really any of the officers that have access to the system, they can log in, they can look at it from wherever they're at and see where our resources, our manpower are at. And then after action reports are actually simplified with this, because we can actually go back later and put together the actual area. If we want to do 1,000 foot or a quarter mile from the actual incident area, we can see exactly where each officer and each vehicle was stationed during that event. Therefore, you're not walking around with a notepad writing down everybody's names and DSNs and all that. You're able just to generate that report from this system. So the car I mentioned earlier was from Creve Coeur, Missouri. They are a partnering agency with us on this. We have an MOU with them. So if you look on this photo here, it shows how we're able to zoom into that particular officer. We can then generate a message to go directly to that officer, which you'll see a sample of that in the photo on the right there, on your right. But anyway, you're able to type in, you can include photos and any descriptors that you want for the BOLO and put that in, send it directly to that individual officer or a group of officers on the scene, depending on what your needs are. So I've included my contact information on here for anybody that's looking into furthering their camera systems with some of the more unique things that we've done with ours. I'd like to talk with you and share that information with you, or we maybe compare notes. That's part of what the user group was that we started. The user group here we're basically working with the same prosecutors, but there's 91 different municipal governments here with 58 different police departments just in St. Louis County. Being able to sit down at a table with people that are using the exact same software and the exact same platform to go to the same prosecutor's office or circuit attorney's office and develop a user group agreement between all of us that this is how we want to proceed with this, or we can talk out problems that we've had with, getting the video sent over to different agencies and that. So it's really kind of helped out quite a bit to be able to sit down with a group and actually work with them on that. And that's all I have for right now.
Thomas, thank you. All very interesting, and what St. Louis is doing, and St. Louis is doing what county is doing with adjoining counties, such as St. Charles County. I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to Adrian Martin, a business intelligence analyst from the Rochester Police Department.
All right, thanks. Yeah, we're from Rochester, New York. We have about 650 officers in our department, about 200,000 people in the city, and had a body-worn camera program since 2016. And so what we're going to do now with this project, I hope, is look at thousands and thousands of hours of footage through the use of machine learning programs. So the end goal is to have a pipeline in which, when an officer docks their camera and uploads a new video, it passes through algorithms that we've built that can help catalog and flag things for review and help build up data sets that allow us to keep an eye on trends and create a library of recent footage that we can use in the academy and for training purposes and policy purposes and things like that. We are doing this jointly with the Rochester Institute of Technology, a local research university, myself and Professor Ernest Fuqua over at RIT. Professor Fuqua is a professor in the computer science and math departments. We finished up a grant with the COPS office in which we looked at, we did natural language processing on written use of force reports from RPD. And so this is kind of building on that, but also expanding it in a much larger way, since one of the key kind of weakness of that project is we're relying solely on the written report from a single point of view, et cetera. So now we're going to be able to combine written reports with programmatic analysis of the camera footage and of the audio. And the hope is that we're basically going to have 4 different kind of deliverables. So we see the kind of flow of the project. We collect the video. Every day we collect about 3 to 4 days on average of video footage. So that's clearly too much for anybody to view. That's why we use the algorithms. We move it over to the supercomputing cluster at RIT, where we build algorithms to do feature extraction, basically create spreadsheets that describe the video footage and the audio in the video footage. From that feature extraction, we will build algorithms that can help us with the due diligence. Let's make sure we don't have any unreported uses of force in our video, but also training assistance, things like identifying our best de-escalators, and so that we can first recognize them, but also have them train in our recruits and things like that, and learn by looking at things like trend analysis of, for instance, are we encountering more illegal firearms? We know that there've been a greater number of firearm purchases since COVID. So do we encounter illegal firearms more often? Do we need to train on that frequently? And then from the feature extraction, we're also going to have these descriptive data sets, and we can use those to inform the public in the context of what, for instance, the next viral video pops off. We want to be able to put that video in context. So like I mentioned, we have trend analysis of patterns of de-escalation, pair and compare. That would be under that learn prong of our deliverables. So what we're going to do is pair up our videos and look for based on what our algorithms think are very similar videos. And then we're going to look at for pairs where one resulted in the use of force and one did not. And then we'll have officers watch those videos and talk about, other than the subject behavior, what factors resulted in one video going south and the other not. We're going to be trying to create this indexed library of videos for in-service and academy training, so we can, for instance, pull up the latest traffic stop in which the officer has dealt with a legal firearm. We'll be able to, of course, do compliance auditing and then these publicly available data sets. The kicker on all this is that 2 weeks ago, we switched over to new body-worn camera system and digital evidence management system. Kind of, potentially a wrench in the system, but the good news is that it's the same. Both systems do 720 resolution, both have the same frame rate. So we're hoping that we're not going to really have any problems in terms of teaching the algorithm to look at the same, at the video from the 2 different systems. So that's all I got.
Adrian, well, thank you. At this time, we'd like to move into a Q&A session, but before we open it up for questions, I'd kind of like to ask Christian, how he thinks best to ensure public acceptance of new technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Charles. So we learned some things with respect to our own body-worn camera program, and we had a lot of stakeholders at the table at the time. And we did our best to communicate internally at the outset of learning that we were going to pilot body-worn cameras. There was a lot of chatter within our agency, the majority negative, ranging from this is what our raises are going to from a financial standpoint, to kind of that sky's falling initial. And I would remind you, this is not current day where the merits of the cameras more widely known. This was still early. So we tried to assuage those concerns early on and engage our employee groups. But we had a lot of folks at the table, and I think one of the things that we really learned was not that we were seeking consensus, not that we were doing policy it was collaborative, but we weren't going for consensus. There were a lot of views, even among our stakeholders, our community stakeholders and special interest groups, that those were in a bit of conflict. There was one individual in particular that he wanted it in policy where every time an officer had their camera on and engaged with a community member, that they would begin the interaction with, "I'm Officer so-and-so, this conversation is being recorded, blah, 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 blah." And, I politely pushed back on that and said, imagine if you took a month out of your life and every time you got a phone call or every time you walked into a store or an establishment, you announced to somebody, "I'm recording this interaction, blah, 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 blah." And I said, how does that change the nature and the quality of your interactions? And now imagine, a publicly facing organization of 1,500 people doing that at scale all day, every day. And, there are instances like sexual assaults, domestic violence, human trafficking, organized crime, that people are actually taken back by the notion that they're being recorded. And we want to build in not flexibility in terms of policy as to when you use your camera, but the ability to allow someone to tell you something in confidence, the ability to engage in sensitive situations where a community member who's not the subject of criminal investigation, where it's not a situation where force is going to be used, where they can actually say, I'd rather this not be recorded. And we coach them and put it in policy where we say, the last thing, or I should say in training, where, the last thing you should say before you're powering down is, "I'm going to turn this off because you've asked me to. Is that okay? I just want to clarify that's what you want me to do." So that we're making it understood that as we power down, it's at the community member's request. We learned a lot in that process. And the next program I was directly involved in was our drone program. So granted, totally different technology, but at the time, similar issues. And we took a lot of those lessons learned. And I would say that we did that one even better, where we had a task force of community members. We hosted public meetings where anybody could come out and ask us anything. We engaged with the media. We engaged with, and I mean like conventional print and video media, but we engaged ourselves on social media. We did a digital Q&A on our public website. And we had an internal working group where we looked at them as the important stakeholders as well and said, you're going to be using this. How do you envision that utility? And we managed to really get that to a place where when that went to a public presentation before our board of supervisors, in a county of 1.2 million people, there was not a single voice that came out in opposition to that program. And I would submit to you that heavy engagement on the front end really contributed to that. And I think the takeaway is not that you're going for consensus, because you're never going to have that, but you give people an opportunity to be heard and you take into account that input. It's not just lip service or checking boxes to say that you did it, because we learned a lot as we went. And some of the things we learned from community members. Thanks.
Good question. Thank you. At this time, we'd like to open it up to everyone for any questions. And kind of to get us going, I'd like to go back to Adrian. And Adrian, what always comes to mind when a department is developing something in-house internally, especially using the large amount of data that you have and software. Is there other products out on the market that would do something similar? And if so, why wouldn't you use that type of product instead of trying to develop it in-house? And then kind of a follow-up question, what would success look like to the department for this project?
Yeah, so Trulio is on the market with a application that does transcription and sort of flags incidents for kind of supervisor review based on respect and that sort of thing. The advantage to us with doing it directly with us and RIT is we have a long-standing working relationship with RIT. RPD and RIT have done research projects with the Criminal Justice Department with John McCluskey and Urshad Altheimer and others in the department there, going back for 15 years or more. And so there's a lot of trust. You can imagine that when we started the prior grant project, it took a lot of trust for the department to say, yes, RIT, you can look at every single use of force written report we have. including, one that resulted in criminal charges, so, we have a good long-standing relationship with our IT, and then we're going to be able to basically tune for what we want. So if we are, for instance, making a lot of progress in one respect, but not a lot in the other, we can say, all right, well, let's focus on that one thing where we're making a lot of progress. Whereas kind of an off-the-shelf program, it's what, you get what the program is. So in regards to what success is, looks like, we have these 4 kind of prongs, and I expect that we'll be able to come up a publicly available data set based on what the features we can extract out of the video data. And if we can't do that, I'll be disappointed. But also that if we can do one of the other 3 prongs very well and get a pipeline going on that, then I would label that a success. Meaning if we can either set up a machine learning pipeline where we can either flag incidents for sergeant review, or we can build an indexed library of footage for trainers to pull local footage of the exact type of incident they want. Or if we can build this data set of basically a trend analysis data set. So we can say, look at, officer crowding or illegal firearms or amount of, for instance, disrespect shown to officers on a scene, is what's going up or down. If we can do one of those 3 prongs and get it operational and load it up on our own servers and have it running, then I will be very, very pleased.
And it's interesting. I mean, the project has a lot of moving parts, improved capacity, transparency, public relations. It touches a little bit about it, a little bit of everything. So we'll be following it very, very closely. This time, I'd kind of like to move back to Thomas now. And Thomas, can you tell us a little bit about your working group? You have a lot of agencies integrating various technologies. You could see them in real time. I would imagine there's a lot of coordination with the other agencies. So if you could just spend a couple minutes, talk about your working group, what challenges there were. Did they solve any issues that you had identified? And are you going to maybe think about expanding it in the future?
Yeah, so we started our working group in June of this year. Started working with the vendor on rolling out the new ALPR system that they have. And it sparked some interest with some of the other contacts I had locally that utilize the same body camera system. So we started working with the vendor a little bit and decided that this would be a great opportunity to bring everybody together and not just, have like a sales call type of meeting where we want to try to sell you this equipment, but actually see it being installed, getting to know how the system's actually working, and then doing some demo work with it. So we invited everyone in the area that was utilizing this system to come on out, and they did. They sent representatives. So that was really the initial meeting of our user group. From that, we spent the whole day playing with the new LPR system and really getting to know it. Then since then, we've had a lot of interaction with each other that normally wouldn't have occurred. There was a lot of different smaller municipalities that were involved with this group that didn't know who their counterpart contract were at these other agencies. We sat down, we had a big lunch and nice discussion about a whole lot of other topics relating to body cameras. And we're basically sitting there, and several agencies were having issues with certain aspects of the program that they weren't familiar with or didn't know how to implement, when other people have pretty much mastered that part of it. So they all compared notes and shared with each other. I think it really brought the group together to basically come up with a new networking group just for the actual body camera system. One of the main areas that all of us identified was how our prosecutors were receiving the videos that they needed and how they were requesting it. It seemed like pretty much all of us were doing it differently, which on my side kind of made more sense as to what was going on with my contact at our county prosecutor's office. They were asking for things a certain way, and I didn't understand that there were other agencies that were giving it to the way they were asking. So we actually sat down as a group and came up with kind of a streamlined, easier method for the prosecutors to receive our data. And as far as like expanding this or any future stuff that we would like to do, we decided that as a group, it would actually be more beneficial to bring the prosecutor's office on board with this group as well, instead of just us, talking about what our problems are with them. Let's bring them in to help even streamline, their end of it, because there was a lot of things we didn't understand they were up against with, the number of cases that they were having and that they were assigning to specific prosecutors for certain level crimes. So you would have that prosecutor wanting something, completely different than a different prosecutor, even from the same office. So bringing them on board, I think, is going to help streamline that issue and benefit the group overall.
So you mentioned how large St. Louis County is, and if I remember right, there's 60 plus agencies in the county. Give us a kind of idea of what's membership like on the working group. How many agencies are participating?
We currently have, there's about 12 to 13 of us that are actively involved in this user group. Since we started it, there's 2 other agencies that came on board. By the end of the calendar year, there's 3 more agencies that will be joining, and they'll also be part of this user group. And there's already discussions with the vendor to spread out to, I believe there's about 4 or 5 additional agencies that are trying to come on next calendar year. So basically we'll have, out of the 58 municipal police departments that are in the county, there'll be a little over 20 of them that are all on the same platform and all communicating with each other and utilizing this data to help, in large events and crime scenes and resource allocations.
If you had to put your finger on probably the biggest issue that prevents the other, you have quite a few agencies and it's growing. What would be the factor preventing an agency participation? And maybe you could maybe touch on the MOUs that you have with each other. And a one-on-one MOU with one agency is pretty simple. But when you have an MOU with many agencies, it becomes quite complex. And maybe talk about your MOUs and any issues with encouraging other agencies to participate.
Right. So early on, there's a couple agencies that were somewhat hesitant to sign MOUs with us. There was a little bit of a misunderstanding on what exactly be sharing with each other. That has since pretty much, we've all sat down, we've all talked about it. And the MOU is pretty clear that it's really just the mapping data that's being tracked and kept. And the biggest benefit is the ability to not just see each other's cars, but to send those individual messages or to create geofences for, like, say there's a multi-jurisdictional response to an active shooter at a mall. The mall might be located, in one of our municipalities that utilize the same system, but the response that's coming could be coming from, any of the other 13 agencies utilizing the same system. So for a commander on a scene like that to be able just to pop up, his live stream mapping and actually see where everyone's at and to be able to direct resources based on the mapping it's hugely beneficial to the scene commander, but the overall, success of identifying or locating the suspects and apprehending them or rendering aid to the people that are involved, the victims of shootings or whatever in that same scenario. It's just now that we've actually had a couple incidents where, we've been able to see how the mapping works and how it can be beneficial. So agencies that come on board with the same system that we're using now, they're pretty open to just basically signing right up and then, diving into the group. I mean, the benefits are actually there. It's the misconceptions of, are you able to see our videos? Are you able to see all of our call comments and things like that? We don't see any of that other information. So it's very limited on what they get, but the limited amount is extremely beneficial.
Is what they need. Well, we're at the end of our time. I would like to first thank the audience and then our 4 panelists. Great discussion.